The Imperial fleet drifted in the darkness of space, its warships lined up like an unbreakable wall. Their shields glowed faintly, their weapons armed, their scanners sweeping the void for any possible threats. The sector had been silent for years. No enemy had dared to challenge them. The Empire was the most powerful force in the galaxy, after all. Commander Xeltor stood on the bridge of the Vindicator, his golden uniform shimmering under the cold artificial lights. He stared at the vast emptiness ahead, his claws tapping against the metal railing. "Any movement?" he asked, his voice calm but commanding. The sensor officer shook his head. "Nothing, sir. Just the usual space debris." Xeltor smirked. Of course, there was nothing. The war had ended long ago. The humans were gone. A faint beep interrupted his thoughts. The officer frowned, adjusting the scanner. "Strange. I'm picking up an object, but it's barely reflecting any signals." "A malfunction?" Xeltor asked, unimpressed. "I don't think so, sir. The object is moving. Slowly, like it's observing us." A ripple of unease spread through the bridge crew. Xeltor leaned forward. Visuals. Now, the screen flickered to life, displaying the vast emptiness of space. At first, there was nothing, just stars and darkness. But then, something shifted. It was a shadow, a shape that wasn't there a moment ago. Long, sharp edges, a hull covered in battle scars. A warship. It didn't match any known Imperial designs. It had no active energy signatures, no broadcast signals, no identification marks. Yet it was there, and it was moving. Xeltor felt his blood run cold. "What is that?" The officer's voice trembled. "Sir, it looks human." Silence fell over the bridge. Xeltor's grip tightened around the railing. Impossible. Humans were wiped out centuries ago. Their fleets were destroyed. Their worlds burned. There were no survivors. Yet, this warship was real. It had been hiding, waiting, and now it had emerged. Xeltor turned sharply. "Activate shields. Prepare all weapons." Alarms blared as the Imperial fleet came to life, warships locking onto the unknown vessel. But the human warship did not move. It simply drifted, like a predator waiting for the perfect moment. And then, without warning, it disappeared. 1 second, it was there. The next, it was gone. Xeltor's heart pounded. Where did it go? The officer's hands shook as he scanned the screens. "I don't know, sir. It's just gone." The darkness outside felt heavier now, pressing against the ship like an unseen force. Something was out there, watching, waiting. And then, a single warning light flashed red. Before anyone could react, a bright beam of energy cut through the silence of space, and the first Imperial warship exploded into fire and debris. The explosion sent shockwaves rippling through the fleet, pieces of molten metal scattering in every direction. The bridge of the Vindicator shook violently, alarms blaring as the crew struggled to make sense of what had just happened. Commander Xeltor gripped the railing, his sharp eyes locked onto the fiery remains of one of his strongest warships. The Crimson Spear, a battleship built to withstand planetary sieges, was now nothing more than drifting wreckage. "Damage report," Xeltor barked. "Sir," an officer's voice cracked with panic. "The Crimson Spear is gone. Complete destruction in a single hit." "That's impossible." Xeltor growled. "What kind of weapon was that? Where did it come from?" The crew scrambled through data, their screens flashing with chaotic readings. But there was no sign of an enemy ship, no visible attacker, no trace of energy buildup. "It came from nowhere," one of the officers whispered. Xeltor clenched his fists. He refused to believe that. "Find that warship. It's out there somewhere." The fleet adjusted formation, their weapons primed, scanning every inch of space. But the darkness remained unchanged, silent, empty, waiting. Then, without warning, another blast. This time, the Eclipse Fang, a heavily armed dreadnought, was hit. Its shield flickered for less than a second before the entire ship was torn apart. The explosion was violent, consuming the massive warship in a storm of fire and twisted metal. Zeltor's throat went dry. His fleet, his undefeated fleet, was being destroyed without even seeing the enemy. "Sir, we still have no visual on the attacker," an officer cried. A deep, chilling realization settled over the bridge. They weren't facing just any warship. They were prey. And something in the dark was hunting them. Across the fleet, panic spread like wildfire. Some captains were calling for a retreat. Others were blindly firing into the darkness, hoping to hit something, anything. Zeltor knew this wasn't an option. If they ran now, they would be slaughtered one by one. They had to fight back. "Full sensor sweep," he ordered. "Find it. I don't care if you have to scan every grain of dust in this sector." The officers obeyed, fingers racing across control panels. A few agonizing moments passed before one of them gasped. "Sir, I think I have it." The main screen shifted, zooming in on what seemed like empty space. But then the officer adjusted the filters. And there it was. A warship, massive and ancient, barely visible against the void. Its surface was blackened, battle-scarred, as if it had endured centuries of war. The design was unmistakable, human. Zeltor's mind reeled. How is that possible? The officer swallowed hard. "Sir, I think it was in stealth mode. The moment it fired, it exposed itself for a fraction of a second. But now, it's gone dark again." Zeltor's claws dug into his palm. "If it bleeds, we can kill it." He turned to his weapons officer. "Charge the ion disruptors. The moment we detect even a flicker, I want every ship in the fleet to fire." "Understood, Commander." The Imperial fleet repositioned, their weapons aimed at the last known coordinates of the warship. Tension thickened like a storm about to break. Seconds passed, then a minute. The silence stretched, unbearable. Then, a whisper of movement. It was small, almost imperceptible, but Zeltor's sharp eyes caught it. "There," he roared. The fleet unleashed hell. Torpedoes streaked through the void. Laser cannons blazed. Ion disruptors sent massive energy pulses toward the target. The combined firepower was enough to level an entire planet. For a moment, it looked like they had won. The warship reeled under the bombardment, its hull glowing red-hot, cracks forming along its surface. And then, it disappeared again. Zeltor's stomach dropped. "Did we destroy it?" "Negative, sir." The officer's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's still there, just hiding." Zeltor's mind raced. What kind of ship was this? How was it surviving? And then the realization hit him like a hammer. It wasn't just surviving. It was testing them. The Imperial fleet braced for another attack, their formation tightening. Every scanner was active, every gun primed. Then, a voice echoed through the comms, a voice they should not have heard. Empire vessels. It was deep, distorted, filled with something ancient and cold. "You are trespassing." The bridge fell deathly silent. Zeltor's blood ran cold. That voice, it was human. The screen flickered. For a fraction of a second, an image appeared, a shadowed figure sitting in a command chair, their eyes glowing with eerie blue light. Then the transmission cut out, and the human warship attacked. This time, it didn't strike from a distance. It charged. The massive vessel burst from the void, moving at impossible speeds for a ship of its size. It was a predator breaking cover, a beast that had grown tired of stalking. The first Imperial warship in its path didn't even get a chance to react. The human battleship rammed straight through it, slicing through its hull like a blade through flesh. The Imperial ship exploded instantly. Zeltor watched in horror as the human warship kept going, weaving through the fleet with terrifying precision. It didn't just destroy ships. It hunted them. One by one, the mighty Imperial warships fell. Their weapons were useless. Their shields meant nothing. This wasn't war. This was a massacre. The bridge of the Vindicator shook as explosions erupted all around. Zeltor barely managed to keep his footing. "We have to retreat," one of his officers screamed. Zeltor wanted to refuse, wanted to fight, but deep down he knew the truth. This warship, this ghost from humanity's past, was beyond them. The Empire had ruled the galaxy unchallenged for centuries. They had thought humans were weak, extinct. They had been wrong. And now they were paying the price. Zeltor's voice was grim. "Send the order. Full retreat." The surviving warships turned, engines burning at full power as they fled. But as they did, Zeltor cast one last look at the human warship. It wasn't chasing them. It simply drifted, watching, waiting. Zeltor felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't over. Humanity was back, and the Empire had just made its greatest mistake. The Imperial fleet had fled, their mighty warships reduced to burning wrecks and scattered debris. The once invincible armada now lay in tatters, drifting through the void. The survivors, those lucky enough to escape, had left behind their fallen, their pride shattered. But the human warship did not pursue. It watched. The Bridge of the Oblivion, the ancient warship that had emerged from the shadows, was dimly lit. Screens flickered with data, and the hum of machinery filled the silence. Captain Elias Voss sat at the center, his gloved fingers tapping lightly against the armrest of his chair. The hunt had begun. Status. Elias' voice was calm, controlled. His second-in-command, Commander Sarah Kane, glanced at the tactical display. "The enemy fleet has retreated, but their distress signals are spreading fast. The Empire will send reinforcements." Elias smirked. "Let them come." Sarah hesitated. "Captain, they will send more than just warships. This time, they will come prepared." Elias leaned forward, his piercing blue eyes locked onto the display. The Empire thought they had erased humanity from history. They had wiped out entire colonies, destroyed fleets, and buried the last remnants of human resistance. But they had failed. The Oblivion had waited, hidden in the ruins of dead worlds, watching from the shadows. It was more than a warship. It was a ghost, a relic of vengeance. And now, it was time to remind the galaxy why humans were feared. Far away, at the Imperial Command Center, Grand Admiral Xyros stood before a massive holographic display. The destruction of his fleet played on repeat, each explosion, each ship torn apart by the unseen enemy. He had underestimated the humans. That mistake would not happen again. "Deploy the Omega fleet," Xyros ordered, his voice cold. "And bring the Dreadspire." Gasps filled the room. The Dreadspire was the Empire's ultimate weapon, a warship the size of a small moon, its firepower capable of wiping out entire star systems. "Sir," one of the officers hesitated, "are we truly deploying the Dreadspire for one ship?" Xyros turned, his expression unreadable. "That is no ordinary ship. That is a survivor, one we should have destroyed centuries ago. We cannot allow it to exist." The order was sent. Across the galaxy, the might of the Empire began to move. The hunt had become a war. Back aboard the Oblivion, Elias watched the incoming transmissions. The Empire's response was swift, as expected. He activated the comms. "Empire vessels," his voice echoed across the void, reaching every listening Imperial outpost. "You have forgotten what humanity is capable of. You erased our worlds, burned our people, and claimed victory over a species that never surrenders." He leaned forward. "Now, we remind you." With a single command, the Oblivion fired a long-range plasma rail, a single precise shot aimed not at a warship, but at the Empire's largest communications hub. The explosion lit up the void, a burning message for all to see. The hunt had truly begun. The wreckage of the Imperial fleet still drifted in the cold void, silent and broken. Fires flickered in the vacuum, casting eerie shadows across twisted metal. The battle had ended, but the war had just begun. The human warship had not vanished after the fight. It remained, hidden in the darkness, watching, waiting. On the bridge of the Oblivion, Captain Elias Voss stood with his hands clasped behind his back. The screens around him displayed the aftermath of the battle. Debris scattered across the sector. The Imperials had retreated, but not before sending distress signals across the galaxy. Reinforcements would come. More warships, more firepower, more desperation. Behind him, Commander Sarah Kane exhaled slowly. They know we're here now. Elias turned, his expression unreadable. They were always going to find out. Now we control how they react. Silence filled the bridge as the crew processed his words. The Empire had ruled unchallenged for centuries, erasing entire civilizations that dared to oppose them. But the Oblivion was a reminder of what they had tried to bury. The last human warship, a ghost of a forgotten war. Sarah studied the captain. You knew this day would come. Elias gave a small nod. That's why we waited. The Empire is arrogant, but fear will make them reckless. We will strike when they least expect it. Across the galaxy, Imperial command was already in chaos. Grand Admiral Cyros paced inside his war chamber, his sharp eyes locked onto the holographic display, showing the obliterated remains of his fleet. No reports of survivors, no recovered data, nothing but destruction. He clenched his fists. Deploy every available warship. I want this thing eliminated. A murmur rippled through the officers around him. A single warship had annihilated an entire battle group. This was no ordinary enemy. Thyros turned sharply. And send the Dreadspire. The name alone was enough to silence the room. The Dreadspire was not just a battleship. It was the Empire's ultimate weapon, a vessel so massive it carried entire invasion fleets within its hull. No one had ever survived its assault. If the Oblivion was a ghost, then the Dreadspire was the executioner. Across deep space, Imperial warships began to move. Thousands of vessels formed strike groups, engines burning toward a single target. The Empire did not tolerate defiance. They would not make the same mistake twice. But the Oblivion had no intention of waiting. On board, Elias watched the reports coming in. The Imperials had taken the bait. He glanced at Sarah, a sharp glint in his eyes. They're coming. Sarah smirked. Then let's welcome them properly. A moment later, the Oblivion vanished into the void, slipping into the darkness where no sensors could track it. The hunt was about to begin. The Empire's response was swift. Across the galaxy, warships mobilized, their engines burning bright as they moved toward the last known location of the Oblivion. The Imperial fleet had never suffered such a humiliating defeat before. The destruction of their forces had sent shockwaves through their ranks, and fear had taken root in the minds of their commanders. The unknown enemy that had emerged from the shadows was not a new rival or a rising power. It was something far worse. It was a remnant of humanity, a species they had thought extinct. Inside the war chamber of the Dreadspire, Grand Admiral Cyros stood before a massive holographic display. The enemy ship was nowhere to be found. No transmissions, no signals, nothing but the cold silence of space. His fleet had been sent to crush a ghost, yet the ghost refused to appear. Where is it? Hyros growled. His officers avoided his gaze, scrambling for answers. One of them hesitated before speaking. Sir, there's no sign of the warship. It's as if it was never there. Cyros narrowed his eyes. Impossible. No ship that size can simply disappear. Keep scanning. It's out there somewhere. But he was wrong. The Oblivion was not hiding. It was already inside the Empire's defenses. Far from the battlefield, within a highly secured Imperial station, alarms suddenly blared. Officers rushed to their stations as lights flickered, screens flashed warnings, and weapons systems went offline. A dark shape loomed outside the viewport, silent, massive, and impossibly close. The Oblivion had infiltrated the Empire's heart. Inside the station, panic spread. Soldiers grabbed their weapons, running through the halls as they tried to prepare for an attack. But there was no invasion, no troops, no battle cries, just a single transmission echoing through their systems. A calm, cold voice. "You have taken everything from us. Now, we take it back." Then, in an instant, the station's core exploded. Fire tore through the facility, consuming everything in its path. The Empire's most secure outpost was nothing more than burning wreckage within seconds. In the depths of space, Elias watched the destruction unfold from the bridge of the Oblivion. The Empire had made the mistake of thinking they were the hunters. But in reality, they were the prey. Sarah stepped forward, a grin tugging at the corner of her lips. "They'll be furious." Elias nodded, his gaze never leaving the burning remains of the station. "Good. Let them be." Across the galaxy, the Empire was realizing a terrible truth. The war they thought had ended was only just beginning. And this time, humanity was not fighting for survival. They were fighting for vengeance. The destruction of the Imperial station sent shockwaves through the Empire's command. Reports flooded in from surviving outposts, fleets moving, systems locking down, entire sectors placed on high alert. The Oblivion had done the impossible. It had struck deep inside Imperial territory and vanished without a trace. Inside the war chamber of the Dreadspire, Grand Admiral Tyros listened in silence as his officers relayed frantic updates. His fingers tapped against the metal surface of the command table, his expression unreadable. He had underestimated this enemy once. He would not make that mistake again. "Deploy the Black Watch," he ordered, his voice cold. The room fell into a hush. The Black Watch was the Empire's elite force, known for hunting down and eliminating threats before they could become true dangers. No fleet had ever escaped them. No enemy had ever survived their pursuit. But the Oblivion was unlike any enemy they had faced before. Far from Imperial eyes, the human warship drifted in the shadows of a dead star, silent, waiting. The crew moved like ghosts, their presence barely registering against the vast emptiness of space. The ship's systems were cold, running on the bare minimum to remain undetected. Elias Voss stood at the center of the bridge, studying the information coming through. The Empire was reacting exactly as expected. Their rage blinded them, making them predictable. And predictable enemies were the easiest to destroy. Sarah Kane leaned against the command console, scanning through intercepted transmissions. "They're sending the Black Watch," she muttered, eyes flicking to Elias. "They're serious now." A slow smile spread across his face. Good. The Black Watch would come. They would bring their best, their strongest, their deadliest. And when they arrived, they would find nothing but silence. And then the trap would be sprung. The Oblivion had spent centuries watching, waiting, learning. Now, it was time to show the Empire what true fear felt like. The Black Watch moved with deadly precision. Their fleet, a formation of the Empire's most advanced warships, spread across the sector like a tightening noose. Cloaking fields engaged, sensor arrays pushed to their limits. Every movement was calculated, every possible hiding place dissected. But space was vast, and the Oblivion was no ordinary warship. Inside the bridge of the Dreadspire, Grand Admiral Tyros watched the operation unfold. His officers relayed reports, scans, telemetry, energy signatures. The ghost ship had to be here somewhere. It was only a matter of time before they cornered it. "Admiral," one of his officers spoke up, voice tight with tension. "We found something. A faint signal. A flicker of movement in the void. A trap." But Tyros didn't realize it until it was too late. The Oblivion emerged from the blackness like a phantom, its weapons already primed. It hadn't been hiding. It had been waiting. Before the Imperial fleet could react, the warship struck. A single shot, the first explosion ripped through the Empire's lead destroyer, splitting it apart like paper. In an instant, chaos erupted. Imperial warships scrambled to reposition, but the Oblivion was already moving. It weaved through the fleet like a shadow, its weapons firing with pinpoint precision. Each shot found its mark. Each blast sent another Imperial warship to its fiery grave. On the Dreadspire, alarms blared. Officers shouted over one another, trying to keep up with the impossible speed of the attack. Cyrus stared at the holographic display in disbelief. This wasn't just a warship, it was a force of nature. "Fire everything," he roared. The Imperial fleet unleashed a storm of energy blasts, missiles, and plasma fire. But the Oblivion twisted and turned, vanishing into the darkness between attacks. It struck like lightning, disappearing before retaliation could land. One by one, the Black Watch fell. Sarah Kane grinned as she monitored the battle from the Oblivion's bridge. They never learn. Elias Voss stood motionless, eyes locked on the carnage before him. "No," he said softly, "they never do." With a final, devastating barrage, the last Imperial warship detonated, its wreckage joining the burning graveyard in space. The Oblivion loomed over the destruction for a moment, watching as the remnants of the once mighty fleet drifted into nothingness. The Empire had sent its best, its strongest, its deadliest. And now, they were gone. Cyrus' flagship was the only survivor, its engines failing, its defenses crippled. Elias opened a channel. "You thought you were the hunters," he said, his voice calm, cold. "You were wrong." The transmission cut. The Oblivion turned and vanished into the void, leaving the broken fleet behind. The Empire had spent centuries believing humanity was gone. Now, they knew the truth, and they were afraid.